The dawn after the battle was the quietest Ilarion had ever known. For years the kingdom had woken to the sound of armor and commands. Now, only the wind moved through the banners that hung torn above the palace gates. King Kale stood at the balcony overlooking his city. The marble beneath his feet was still stained with ash, yet the air smelled of rain and renewal. Beside him, Lyra watched the first light crawl over the ruined rooftops, her hands folded against the chill. Neither spoke at first. Silence had a language of its own, and theirs was heavy with things neither dared say aloud. At last Kyle turned. "You should rest," he murmured. His voice was softer now, stripped of the iron it once carried. "I will," Lyra answered, "when you do." He almost smiled. Almost. Below them, soldiers cleared the debris while children chased each other through the courtyards. Life was returning. Still, Kale's heart felt uncertain, like a blade freshly reforged, strong yet untested. Lyra's gaze followed his. "They look at you differently now," she said. "How so?" "As if you're one of them again." He said nothing. Years of rule had taught him that distance was safer than closeness, that affection made rulers weak. Yet when she reached out and placed her hand over his, the thought dissolved like frost in sunlight. That evening, the palace hosted a gathering for the wounded and the lost. Torches burned low while music drifted softly through the hall, music Kyle had not heard since before the curse. He sat among his people rather than above them, the weight of his crown less than the warmth of Lyra's presence beside him. When an elder raised a cup to toast the goddess, the crowd shouted her blessing, "To the moon who binds what was broken." Kyle lifted his own cup halfway, then hesitated. The words felt foreign on his tongue, but Lyra's glance urged him on. "To the moon," he echoed, voice deep and steady, "and to those she sends to remind us what it means to feel." A cheer rose. Lyra smiled, not for the toast, but for the man who had spoken it. Later that night, they walked alone through the royal gardens. The moon hung enormous and pale, lighting the path of white lilies that bordered the fountain. The scent of them reminded Kale of spring, long lost. "This place survived the fire," Lyra said, brushing a petal with her fingers. "Nothing survives war unscathed," he replied. "Not even flowers." "Then perhaps they're stronger than we think." He studied her, the silver strands of her hair glinting against the dark. "Do you truly believe the goddess chose you for this?" Lyra turned toward the water. "I didn't believe it at first. I thought she was cruel, to send me to the man who once defied her. But when I saw you, I realized she wasn't punishing either of us. She was giving us both another chance." Another chance. The words lingered. He took a breath. "And if I fail again, then we fail together," she said simply. For a moment, Kale forgot the centuries of kingship that taught him never to hope. The night hummed with quiet promise. In the following weeks, the palace slowly mended. New banners were woven, the walls repainted, the temple rebuilt. Lyra moved freely among the people, healing, blessing, listening. She belonged to them in a way Kale never had, and yet every evening she returned to him. Sometimes she read to him from the sacred texts, her voice low and melodic. Sometimes they sat in silence, content to share the stillness. One night, as she finished reading a passage about the balance between strength and mercy, Kyle asked, "Do you think the goddess forgave me?" Lyra closed the book. "Forgiveness isn't something she keeps locked away, it waits. You only had to open your heart long enough to find it." He nodded slowly, letting her words sink deep. But peace, as Kale had learned, is never eternal. Rumors began to drift in from the northern borders, whispers of a clan rising under a new leader, one who claimed the moon had abandoned Ilarion for his people instead. Councillors urged immediate retaliation. Kyle listened but said little. He had tasted too much blood to crave more. That night he walked the empty throne room alone. The moonlight painted the floor in fractured silver. "Power or peace?" he murmured to the silence. "Must I choose again?" He didn't notice Lyra until her hand touched his arm. "You're not the same man who made that choice before," she said. "You don't have to be." Her certainty steadied him. "Then tell me, priestess, what would you have your king do?" She smiled faintly. "Lead with the heart that once refused to kneel. It knows the way now." Days later, emissaries from the northern clan arrived. They expected arrogance. Instead, they found a ruler who met them with calm and with Lyra beside him. Negotiations stretched long into the night. Where once Kyle would have demanded obedience, he offered alliance. He spoke of rebuilding lands together, of sharing harvests and safety. By dawn, an agreement was sealed, not through conquest, but through compassion. As the emissaries departed, Lyra turned to him, eyes shining. "You did it." He shook his head. "We did." That evening, under the quiet hum of the moon, Kyle and Lyra stood again at the balcony. The city lights shimmered below like scattered stars. "I used to think love made rulers weak," Kyle said softly. "And now?" "Now I think it makes them human," Lyra smiled, leaning into the wind. "And that, my king, is what the goddess wanted all along." He reached for her hand, not as a monarch claiming what was his, but as a man grateful for what he'd been given. For the first time since his coronation, Kyle felt peace, not the cold peace of victory, but the warm, quiet one that follows surrender. The moonlight had not yet faded when Kale's breath steadied against Lyra's hair. The world around them was silent, except for the sigh of the pines and the slow return of life to the ruined courtyard. The curse was gone, but the quiet that followed was not peace. It was the trembling of two hearts trying to learn a new rhythm after too many years of battle. Lyra tilted her face toward him. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. Kyle listened. At first only the wind. Then, faintly, the pulse of wolves far beyond the mountains. Free again. "The world remembers us," he said, voice rough. "And it forgives." She smiled, but her eyes were red from everything that had broken before this moment. "Then we must learn to forgive ourselves." He touched her cheek with a gentleness she had never known from a king, his thumb brushing the trail of her tears as if memorizing them. "Stay," he said, "not as my queen, as my heart." "I never wanted your throne," she murmured. "Only the man who forgot he still had one." The days that followed were a blur of rebuilding. The palace smelled of pine resin and ash, the walls patched with silvered stone. Kyle moved among his people not as a sovereign, but as a brother returned from death. Each time Lyra walked beside him, whispers followed, the Seer who tamed the Alpha King. At night they met on the high terrace where the moon reflected in the lake below. Lyra taught him to listen to the songs of the forest again, the language of wolves, of wind, of healing. He in turn showed her the letters of his ancestors, carved into obsidian slabs, teaching her their meaning until her fingers learned to trace the runes as if they were verses of love. One evening, a storm rolled in from the west. Lightning crawled across the sky like veins of the gods. The council urged Kale to remain inside, but Lyra stood by the window, watching the storm unfurl. "It's angry," she said softly. "No," Kyle replied. "It's alive, the way you are." He walked to her side, the heat of his presence blending with the chill of the rain that began to patter against the stone. The closeness between them was wordless, a slow pull stronger than gravity itself. "Kyle," she said, almost a warning. He lowered his head until their foreheads met, eyes closed. "Tell me to stop." She didn't. The thunder outside roared approval, and for a long moment they stood like that, just breath, heartbeat, the smell of rain and promise. When he stepped back, it wasn't reluctance, but reverence. "If I ever forget this peace again," he said, "remind me what it costs." Lyra nodded, her hand resting over his chest. "And if I ever lose my courage, remind me why it was you I saw in every vision." But peace is never a story's end. By the third moon, scouts brought news from the borders, rogue packs refusing the new rule, whispering that Kale's heart had made him weak. Some of his council began to murmur too. An alpha who kneels for love will one day kneel for defeat. Lyra heard them. She felt the weight of their doubt pressing on Kale like invisible armor. That night, she found him in the war chamber, staring at the map lit by a single candle. "You should rest," she said. He didn't look up. "The world doesn't rest, Lyra." She stepped closer. "You built a world that can." His jaw tightened. "And if it falls because I hesitated?" She reached for his hand and placed it over her heart. "Then it falls with love, and that is something no war can erase." Kyle's eyes softened. "You always find the one thing I can't argue with. That's why the goddess sent me." He smiled, a rare, unguarded thing, and in that moment she saw the boy he had once been, long before the crown and the curses. The next morning the council gathered in the hall. Kyle rose before them, Lyra standing quietly at his side. "You fear that love weakens the crown," he said. "You are wrong. Power without love made me a tyrant. Love without power made me human. But together," he looked toward Lyra, "they make me whole." The room fell silent. One by one the elders bowed, not to the crown but to the man wearing it. Later, when the hall emptied, Lyra whispered, "You spoke like a poet." He laughed quietly. "You turned me into one." "And poets," she teased, "are the most dangerous of kings." That night, the storm returned, not from the sky this time, but from the edge of the realm where shadows gathered again. Kale and Lyra stood at the battlements, watching lightning dance over the distant hills. "We'll face it," she said. "Together," he replied. Their hands intertwined. The wind wrapped around them like an oath renewed. As the first howl rose from the dark horizon, Lyra's voice cut through the thunder. "Do you still hear the heartbeat of the world?" Kyle closed his eyes. "I do. And it beats for you." The storm swallowed their words, but the moon heard, and the light over the castle shimmered like a promise carved in eternity. The storm that Kale and Lyra watched from the battlements did not fade with dawn. It rolled inward, thick with ash and the smell of iron. When scouts returned at last, their faces were pale. "They march under no banner," the captain reported. "Wolves that once swore to you, sire. They say the old law calls for a king without a mate." Kale's fingers tightened around the railing. "Then they march for a ghost." Lyra stood beside him, cloak whipping in the wind. "A ghost cannot hurt us, but doubt can." He looked at her. "You think they doubt me?" "No," she said softly. "They doubt love." The council begged him to crush the rebellion quickly, but Kale refused the cruelty he once would have chosen. Instead, he sent envoys. He sent mercy. Days passed without word. At night, Lyra found him pacing the moonlit corridor, the silver in his hair catching light like threads of frost. "You cannot fight every shadow," she told him. He stopped. "I can fight the one that wears my face." She touched his arm. "Then let me stand with you. Let them see what they fear, that love survives the storm." He hesitated, then nodded once, the gesture of a king yielding not from weakness, but trust. They rode out before sunrise. The sky was heavy with low clouds that glowed faintly red, as if dawn itself bled. The borderlands were raw and wild, the soil black with centuries of war. When they reached the rebel camp, the air crackled with tension. Kale dismounted, unarmed. Lyra followed, her cloak sweeping the ground like spilled night. A roar rose from the gathered wolves. "The king kneels to a seer!" someone shouted. Kale's voice cut through the noise. "I kneel to no one, I stand beside her." The crowd stilled. His words carried the weight of thunder, measured, certain, alive. Then a tall figure stepped forward. Rydar, Kale's former second-in-command. His eyes burned with old loyalty turned sour. "You traded strength for softness," Rydar said. "The packs need the monster you buried." Kale shook his head. "They need the man who learned mercy." Rydar drew his blade. "Then prove mercy's worth." Steel rang through the valley. The fight was not fast. It was brutal in its silence. Kale fought without rage, his movements clean, deliberate. Lyra watched, her power stirring like wind through the grass. not to shield him but to steady the air around him, to make the world remember who he was. When Kale finally disarmed Rydar, he did not kill him. He pressed the blade's edge to the ground instead. "This ends here," he said. "The crown is not forged in blood anymore." Rydar fell to one knee, breath ragged. "Then may the gods spare us if you're wrong." Kyle extended his hand, helped him rise. Around them, the wolves lowered their weapons. Thunder broke overhead, not of war but of rain. That night, back within the camp, the fires burned low. Kyle sat beside Lyra, their hands linked loosely. "You changed everything today," she whispered. He looked into the flames. "No, you did the moment you made me believe I could." Her smile was small, tired but radiant. "And do you still?" He nodded. "Even when the world doubts me." Outside, the rain turned gentle, washing the blood from the soil. Somewhere beyond the horizon the moon lifted, silver, whole, eternal. Lyra leaned against him, and for the first time since the curse broke, Kyle felt peace without guilt. The rain lasted 3 days. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, every roof of the citadel glimmered like glass. Kyle walked the ramparts in silence, feeling the weight that war always leaves behind, the quiet that never feels like peace. Lyra followed at a distance until he stopped to watch the sunrise. "It almost feels new," he said. "It is new," she replied. "You chose to begin again." He turned toward her, the light catching in his eyes. "Beginnings are easy. It's keeping them alive that's hard." Lyra came beside him, slipped her fingers through his. "Then let's keep it alive, together." When they returned to the palace, Kyle found the great hall filled with offerings from the clans, silver bowls of mountain salt, wolf-fang pendants, carved moonstones. "They've accepted your rule," said the steward. "Our rule," Kyle corrected, and placed one of the moonstones into Lyra's hand. "You're part of their story now." She smiled faintly. "Then we'll have to give them one worth remembering." That evening, the council met beneath the high dome. The air smelled of ink and old parchment. They spoke of rebuilding roads, of treaties, of peace. Kyle listened, but his thoughts wandered to the window where Lyra stood watching the twilight. When the meeting ended, he joined her. "Do you ever miss the wandering?" he asked. "Sometimes. But every journey ends somewhere. Maybe mine ends here with you." He looked at her carefully. "And if the goddess calls you away again?" Lyra met his gaze. "Then you'll know I didn't leave. I only returned to where the moon can still see you." Weeks passed. The realm began to heal, but Lyra felt something shifting. The nights grew brighter, almost too bright. The moon hung lower in the sky. The wolves howled not in fear, but in reverence, as if answering a call older than the kingdom itself. One night she woke from a dream, trembling. Kyle was already awake beside her, eyes open to the light that poured through the window. "You heard it too," he murmured. "The goddess," Lyra whispered. "She's calling for balance." The curse was broken, but the bond between power and love must be sealed, or darkness will return. Kyle rose, pulling on his cloak. "Then we'll go to her temple." The temple of the Silver Veil stood at the edge of the realm, carved into a mountain whose peak pierced the stars. They rode for 2 days through silent valleys until the stone doors appeared before them. Inside, candles burned in bowls of water. Their reflections shimmered like living moons. Lyra knelt first. "Great Mother, we come not to ask, but to offer." Kyle followed her gaze upward. A voice filled the chamber. Not sound, but thought, deep as the tide. "You learned the cost of power. You learned the gift of love. What will you give to keep them one?" Lyra turned to Kyle. "If the bond must be sealed, it should be me. The curse began with my vision." Kyle shook his head. "It ends with us both." The moonlight gathered around them, rising like mist. For a heartbeat, the temple vanished. There was only silver light and the steady sound of 2 hearts. "Then give your promise," the voice said. "Let it echo beyond crowns and lifetimes." Kyle took Lyra's hand. I promise that no throne, no power, no storm will stand between us." Lyra's voice trembled. "And I promise that even if the moon forgets its light, I will remember yours." The light flared, then folded into them, a warmth that was neither blessing nor curse, only balance. When they stepped outside, dawn had come. The world looked untouched, new. Kyle exhaled slowly. "It's over," he said. "No," Lyra whispered, smiling. "It's beginning again." He laughed quietly. "Then let's begin." That night, back in the citadel, music drifted through the halls. The people danced for the first time in years. Kyle watched from the balcony, untied. The peace that followed the sealing of the bond was deep, but fragile. For weeks the skies stayed clear, and children played again in the courtyards. Yet Kyle sometimes woke before dawn, with the feeling that someone, somewhere, was holding its breath. Lyra sensed it too. "Light never comes without shadow," she told him, "but maybe this one isn't meant to destroy, only to remind." Still, the old unease would not rest. One evening, as the council prepared for the midsummer gathering, a messenger stumbled through the gates. His armor was scorched. "A darkness in the northern forest," he gasped. "No army, something older. It moves like smoke. It calls your name." Kyle and Lyra rode before sunrise. The land grew colder with every mile until the trees turned silver with frost, though it was summer. At the forest's heart stood a mirror lake that reflected nothing. The surface was black glass. From it rose a figure made of shadow and memory, Kale's own shape crowned in fire. "I am what you left behind," it said. "The power you cast away for love. Without me, you are nothing." Kale stepped forward, sword drawn but steady. "Then nothing will stand here." Lyra's hand brushed his arm. "Don't fight what you already conquered. Accept it." The shadow laughed. "Acceptance is surrender." "No," Kyle said quietly. "It's freedom." He lowered his blade and walked straight into the darkness. The air rippled. For an instant the shadow and the man became one. Lyra closed her eyes, whispering the words of balance the goddess had given them. The lake shuddered and stilled. When she opened her eyes, Kyle stood alone. The shadow was gone. His eyes, once gold, now held a thread of silver, moonlight woven into daylight. "It's done," he said. "Power and love. One heart." They returned to the citadel beneath an amber sky. The people gathered silently as Kyle lifted his crown, then placed it on the stone altar. "No ruler stands above those he serves," he declared. "The crown will rest until another earns it in kindness." Gasps filled the hall, but Lyra smiled. She saw what few did. The act was not abdication, but completion. That night, on the same balcony where their story began, they watched the moon rise. "Do you ever wonder," Lyra asked, "what the goddess saw in us?" Kyle took her hand. Two stubborn souls who refused to stop believing. She laughed softly. "Then may we stay stubborn forever." He turned to her, eyes soft with the peace he had fought a lifetime to find. "Forever sounds shorter than I'd hoped," he said. "Then let's make it endless," she whispered. The wind carried their laughter across the valley. Below, the wolves lifted their voices, not in mourning this time, but in harmony. The sound rolled through the mountains until even the stars seemed to listen, and somewhere, beyond the veil of the world, the moon goddess smiled. For the first time in ages, the realm of light and shadow knew no king, no throne, only two hearts whose love had become its sun and moon.